Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Mazza, percussionist and drummer and artistic director of Cosa Music, inviting you to listen in conversation with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. And remember to subscribe so you may receive notices of upcoming episodes and other interesting things that happen to us here in Shaping Your Journey. Today, I have the great pleasure of having a friend. Well, we worked together on many capacities. He was with the Ludwig Drum Company for years. I mean, he was almost the Ludwig Drum Company, which I've been a proud endorser. I've always played Ludwig drums sometimes I didn't realize, even before I was an endorser. But please, Jim Catalano. Thank you so much, Jim, for being on the show. Finally.
Very good. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see you again.
And before we start, I know a little bit of your background because I would always run into you in the shows, and you're always an incredible supporter of everything I certainly did. Tell us, like, where did it start for you? Like, what was the first spark, those first fires that started it for you? So you played drums, or it become...
Well, actually, I wasn't a drummer initially. My first spark happened when I was 5 years old, and I heard a drum and bugle corps practicing in my backyard. And I came from Erie, Pennsylvania, around that area. And I heard this corps. I was 5. I heard them practicing, and the brass absolutely captivated me. I just was so excited. And so I actually played trumpet when I started in 4th grade until in 5th grade, I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan TV show on February 9th, 1964. And that day changed everything. That's when I decided I wanted to be a drummer going forward, and, told my parents that we got to sell the trumpet and I'm going to be a drummer. That's it.
It's funny, Jim, because I'm going to share this with you. Not too many people know. I started as a drummer, and of course, Ringo Starr. That night, the next day, we were all musicians, of course, and that's where it happened for me as well. We have Greg Bisonet and I have a really good laugh about that, and so many of us. That was the big launch, but also later on, I wanted to join this marching band. And they had too many drummers. So the director said, well, Aldo, you would love for you to join the band, but we need bugle players. So I played bugle.
Yeah.
But then I would show up early to the rehearsals, and I would ask the drummers, show me some things. So if ever any of you leave or you need a sub, I'll know what to do, and then I'll be ready. That never happened. So until I played in that band, marching band, the bugle, for a long time. But it was great.
Yes, and they were, and in the bugles of that era, they were what was called G bugles, and they had a single piston to them. And so you really had to do an awful lot of lip motion in order to make them work properly.
Well, actually, this was different. It had a valve that you had to do this. So you played either in G or in F.
Oh, okay.
All response things. So we were divided, ba-da-da-ba-ba-ba-ba, so it was like the back and forth thing. And sometimes some of us would do both. So we would have to do this.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, the key about all of that when you start out is, because my parents at first were kind of a little bit leery of me switching instruments. Right. So the key was getting a teacher and studying it clearly and being involved in the school band. That's exactly, what I was encouraged to do. And I had a great teacher when I was young named Cootie Harris. And now Cootie Harris was an African-American gentleman who had just come in from New York City, where he tried to make it as a player. But he got to play sometimes with some of the greats, not as their regular, but he got to do jam sessions with them. And I studied with a real jazz guy from New York. And, it's sort of interesting, yes, I played rock and I did the symphonic route and I did all the stuff, but jazz was always my That was my main thing. And it was because of those early roots. But he was also a hand percussionist. And so he was so into African percussion. And when I would go to his house for lessons, there was all these African djembes and ashikos and all sorts of stuff there for me to play. And boy, it opened up a whole new world.
Wow. How old were you then?
So I was, let's see, I was 10 years old when I started. And so by the time I'm taking lessons, 11, 12 years old. And I always remember this. This is an important thing. Is I remember being about 12 or 13. And I remember him at a lesson saying, now we're going to listen to this guy. His name is Miles Davis. And we listened to I forget the album right now, but we listened to the album or some sections on it. And he said, so what do you think of that drummer? And I'm thinking to myself, wow, he was great. And he said, now the drummer's name is Tony Williams. And so he did the math and he said, what you need to know is that we'll say 13 years old right now. Maybe I was 12. And he said, he's only 17 or 18 years old.
Yeah.
And it was like, that opened up a whole nother can of worms for me because I realized that someone could rise to that level of musicality still at a young age. And so it encouraged me in a tremendous way.
Beautiful. It's funny because that makes me think of what happened to me when I was first introduced to the Tony Williams. It was my first year university. I was studying with a great timpanist with the National Arts Center in Ottawa, Ian Bernard. He knew I was a rock drummer first, so I was studying classical now with him. And one day he comes in and he says, I have this album for you. I want you to listen to it and tell me what you think. So it was Tony Williams' Lifetime, the black one, with the trio. So I took it home and I put the record on and I flipped too. So when I went back, my next lesson says, so what'd you think? I said, wow, that's incredible. I don't know how many overdubs he did, but those cymbals were like so tight. He said, yeah, Jim. He looked at me, he says, okay, that's probably one take, and that's Tony playing. And I just my fuses went, said, you gotta be kidding me. How do you do that?
Yeah. Exactly.
Great. I mean, what's great about this is that people take the responsibility of introducing these ideas, these people, these concepts, these visionaries from before, so that it turns your brains on or fries them.
Right. Yeah, both. And I was so involved in drum corps too, so because I did go into drum corps, and I was eventually I started off as I think a tenor drummer back then in that era, because I'm fairly old, and so I played the tenor drum, which was a single drum that had no snares on the bottom, and I used to go to Canada all the time because we used to compete in around the Great Lakes area. I remember there was a drum corps called the Guelph Royal Airs, from just across the lake from Erie, Pennsylvania. And so, I just had all these opportunities to learn, tenor drum at first. And then eventually, by my second or third year in drum corps, I finally made the snare line. And boy, that was something else, to have that level of expertise sort of taught to you. And once again, taught to me by people that weren't that much older than me.
Wow.
Okay. They may have been 3 or 4 years older than me, but, getting me, to be a precise type of a player and building up my chops, which has been very valuable, throughout my career.
And then you studied at Notre Dame. I noticed you're wearing the logo, the T-shirt with the logo on it.
Yeah. Well, I teach there right now, but I actually, after high school, I became a percussion major at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where I studied with a man named Dr. Gary Olmsted, and another gentleman who was there on a sabbatical named Dr. Scott Previs. And he was there just for 1 year, but boy, he really really taught me a lot about jazz and about jazz vibes playing. And so got me very much involved in drumming and vibes playing on a more commercial basis. So that I won a graduate assistantship to Notre Dame for grad school. And that was, back in 1975 is when I started at Notre Dame. And but my teacher that I got to have when I was at Notre Dame, my first teacher was Gordon Peters from the Chicago Symphony. Okay, but I only studied with him for a short period of time because that was when he took over the conductorship of the Grant Park Symphony, which would be like the second symphony in Chicago. And so he became like the director of that, I guess. And so he transferred me to Bobby Christian,
Wow.
the famous Bobby Christian.
I know.
And so, so what was so wonderful about that, which set me up for my life a little bit better than what I even had thought at the time, because I was going down very much a symphonic route. I was going to be a symphonic percussionist, period. That's what I was going to be. But when I studied with Bobby, he could teach me all that stuff, but he was a commercial percussionist. And he played, all the hand percussion, but he did timpani, he did, obviously snare drum, drum set, but he did vibes and he did jazz. And I'll always remember my final lesson with Bobby Christian was he said, "So Jim, what are you going to do now that you're graduating? What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to do some recitals and things like that." He said, "No, you're probably not." He said, "What did we study?" I said, "Well, we studied a lot of drum set stuff and we studied a lot of vibes." And he said, "Let me give you a tip." He said, "Number one, if you're a good drum set player and rule number one is it's not about you. As long as you know how to be, in the band and support the music, you'll always work." He said, "Number two, symphonic percussion." He said, "There's going to be local symphonies and local bands that you can be in. As long as you do that, you'll always work." And he said, "Number three, he said, I know you love the marimba." He said, "But they're big and they're heavy and they're hard to move." He said, "If I were you, I would stop, sell your marimba if you can only afford one instrument." And he said, "And buy a vibraphone." And he said, "If you play regular standards, regular tunes, and you know how to comp, which you do, and you know how to play melodies, and you know how to improvise," he said, "you'll always work." Well, I sort of embodied those three things. And, now at 70 years old, I've always worked. And, most people don't know me, in the percussion world. In other words, with your market, they don't know me as a player. They know me as a businessman.
Yeah.
Okay. Because, I was the director of marketing for Ludwig for 36 years. And I actually had 5 years of experience before that because I worked at Premier Drums and Slingerland Drums before I worked at Ludwig. So 41 years in the music industry. But the part that I'm so thankful for, now I had to put in work, and that is that I never stopped playing.
Right.
Always kept up my abilities with my chops as far as snare drums, with drum set, with vibes, with symphonic percussion, with hand percussion. And I have a saying with hand percussion, for what I lack in talent and technique, because I don't really know what I'm doing, I make up in equipment because I got all the right stuff. Okay. So sometimes I get gigs, not because I'm that great at it, but because I'm the guy that they know has the equipment, and so therefore I can get the gig.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's good. But those what you mentioned, those three things, that's amazing. And I had the good fortune of meeting and working 1 week with Bobby Christian. I met him at the Ludwig Percussion Symposium that I went to, which was like my launching pad, my other launching pad, because I was a rock drummer who discovered jazz and classical music, and I saw it all. I said, "This is what I want to do," and I just was taking the steps to do it. And when I read, I forget what, with either PAS or Downbeat, or I read it somewhere about this camp, and I would go to anything that moved. when I went to that camp, I think it was in Madison. Yeah, Madison, Wisconsin.
Yes, that was one of the main sites. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just completely, it was like putting a rocket on me. And I was never the same since, because I mean, imagine, I don't know if you went, I mean, you were involved in those camps, I'm sure. I don't know how long they did them, but I
Well,
sat
they
in,
stopped in 1984 was the last one. I was involved in two, 83 and 84, and that was the end.
okay, because those were brilliant and they really set the stage. For me personally, I became like a rocket. So imagine I'm sitting in a class with Gary Burton. Gary Burton
Yeah.
shows me how to hold four mallets. And of course, then I had to learn to play four mallets. But that was the beginning of holding four mallets and learning that technique. Uh, I mean, who else was there? There was, I mean, Carmine App,
Alan Dawson would have been there on drum set.
uh,
He was there a lot.
Joe Morello.
Joe Morello, yeah.
And Bobby Christian blew my mind because he did everything. So then I'm justifying, I don't have to choose. I don't have to make a decision. I could attack all of this. So this kind of gave me license when I saw all of those guys for 1 week
Yeah.
in one place. I wasn't the same. And then I met, of course, Maury Leishon and his wife, who had a little shop
Oh, yeah.
there.
From
And they
Frank's Drum
became like
Shop.
my adopted second parents. And
Yeah.
and then it's funny because once I left, that Maury and Jan invited a few of us to come by the store. So I stayed in Chicago a few days and went to the store and was watching all of these guys come through, because Chicago was the main town, right?
Oh,
And
yeah. That was it.
one day I said to, he took us out to dinner one night, and then I'm walking in the store day in, day out, and I'm just looking at all of this stuff, floors of it. I'd never seen anything like it. And then just before leaving, I went up to Maury and I said, Maury, I really want a set of vibes, an M55, that one, but I don't have the money. What do you think he did, Jim? You know him. You knew him, right?
Well, in 1975, I did the same thing.
Oh,
You know, yeah, because in 1975, I was, a grad student at Notre Dame. So I would take my weekends sometimes. I'd take we have a train, an electric train that goes from South Bend, Indiana to Chicago, right down to the loop. And so I would take that train up to Chicago and I would go, to Bill Crowden's store, which was called Drums Limited, not to be confused with Bethesda, Maryland's Drums Unlimited. And then I would go and spend all kinds of times at Frank's Drum Shop. And so what was so great about that is you literally ran into everybody. On a Saturday, I mean, Roy Knapp would come in, and he was pretty old and was real heavy at the time. But he would come in and Mark would say, oh, yeah, this is the kid from Notre Dame, and stuff, and who's studying with Bobby, and then you'd just be there. And all of a sudden, Louis Belson would come up.
yep.
He was in town for some kind of a concert, it was amazing. And do you remember the filing cabinet drawers? There would be these big filing cabinets with, say, five drawers full, high. And I would go through there and I look at some of the music and the literature that I have today, and it still has the Frank's Drum Shop oval badge sticker on it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was buying all that music and then I was, taking it back and devouring it. And it's what a special time and a special era. But I told Frank, I said, Maury, I need to buy an M55 Vibe. And so stupidly, in order to afford it, I sold my round badge Gretsch drum set,
Oh,
which by today's standards would really be considered a brain dead thing to do.
Yep.
But that's what I did to get some of the money. And I remember Maury said, and you'll love this, kid, I really like you. I'm going to give you a 10% discount. Back then, a 10% discount was a big deal.
sure. That's a lot of money, but
It was a lot of money. I couldn't believe it. And, just so we can, to give you a perspective of how it was so expensive to me, but it was $1,000 and I only had to pay $900.
sure.
And I was like, wow, I am saving $100. I can't believe it. So it was really very special. And by today's standards, 10% discounts means is not good. But back then it was very good.
No,
And
Maury.
I still have that vibraphone today.
Oh, same here. You can see it. You can see mine in the back there.
Yeah.
And it traveled the world with repercussion. Amazing instrument. But the funny thing is that Maury said to me, okay, take the vibes, send me the money when you have it. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, really. So, of course, when I came back, I was so flabbergasted. I said, I can't believe he did that to almost a stranger. I've known him for a week. And then,
Yeah.
of course, when I came back, I said, no, I have to hold my end of the bargain. Otherwise, I will never sleep for the rest of my life. So I've
Well,
got it
well,
all.
what I learned to do is I remember I got $600 for my drum set, which was a lot of money for a drum set back then.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so I needed $300 more for that $900 vibraphone. And so I already was playing, so I knew my 4-mallet technique, and so I still do this today. I accompany myself on tunes, standards,
Right.
okay? And I got a job at a hotel in their restaurant playing, instead of piano bar, I played vibe bar. And I would sit there and I would take requests, and I had my fake books, and I literally had big thick books like this with every tune, and I was a good reader, and so I knew my changes, knew my chords, I could read the melodies, and sometimes I maybe had never even played the tune before, but if someone said, hey, can you do this tune? Of course, I had a tip jar there beside my vibes, a big goblet that was shaped like this. There were nights I could make $50 a night just in tips.
Wow. That's great.
So I remember I paid that vibraphone off in a month, and I felt, so good about that. And still, the whole rest of my life, I'm working on tunes today. I'm practicing today, just learning more standards. And I don't do the real heavy kind of modern standards of today, but I know, a lot of tunes. I probably play 400 plus tunes, maybe more.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
it's amazing. I mean, we should never stop. And it's so nice to see that you haven't. And of course, I've known you mainly as the guy at Ludwig that when we did the whole Costa thing, aside from helping me out with, dealing with the company and instruments, and you're the guy. I mean, also when we had to deal with getting people for the camp, for the workshop, the Costa
Mhm.
camps, you're always super helpful. And I remember I said one year, I said, we have to get Mr. Ludwig himself. Remember that? The chief?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So that one year we did the camp, mostly we did it in Vermont, but that one year we moved it to Potsdam, just because they're redoing the theater and stuff. So Jim Petersack said, why don't you come and do the camp at our place? So we did. And it was funny when Mr. Lou, I'll say the chief,
Yeah.
when he came in, what a class act. And this is funny, Jim, because he would do his whole thing about the silent movies and the sound effects and all of that. And he was brilliant. So here we are. We're all sitting there because we would do master classes of special guests, and then everybody would go
Mhm.
off and study with the different people because we had like all the great artists. It was the Ludwig Symposium that really inspired me to do this. And I said, I will take it like a few notches higher than that because that's the way it should be. So anyway,
Yeah.
Mr. Ludwig was there and he's doing his thing, and sitting in the audience with us is one of our other instructors, our regular instructors, Jim Chapin, that
Of course.
and many others. So Jim is sitting there, and all of a sudden he looks at Jim. Jim, you're full of. He says that was in 1934, and then Mr. Ludwig would look at him and says, Jim, you don't know what you're talking about. You're getting old. That was in 1933, and I remember that like. So they're going back and forth, friendly this argument. So we're all going like this and going like that, and we can't believe it. And I mean, that was the kind of guy he was. And of course, we created the environment for that to happen. So the experience that people got was the real one. You know?
Oh yeah.
And
You
by
know,
the
I
way,
was
just
yeah.
before you get hold on to your thought, because we used to film everything, right? So we've got everything archived. And I had Ludwig 3 on the podcast, and I told him about that. He says, "You have a copy of that?" I says, "Yes, of course." During the whole COVID shutdown, we digitized all those years,
Oh
of
my.
OSA, the camps, the workshops, the festival, the concerts, the master classes, and even repercussion, all the repercussion tours worldwide. I have it all
Hmm.
documented. So he said, I need to have a copy of that because I'm doing that now. So I sent it to him.
Yeah. Yeah, I was with Bill recently at the Chicago Drum Show,
Okay.
and we spent some good time together. We're still very good friends, even though he does his own separate thing with WFL three drums. We're still very close, and I was very close to the chief. In fact, I'm the guy that named him the chief.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and what was so wonderful about this guy was he kind of accepted me because I was a total percussionist,
Right.
because I played everything, sort of like he did. Okay. And of course, we really connected on rope drums
Oh, yeah.
and on the old rudiments type of things. And when he would talk about the books that he and his father wrote, senior, okay, and he would talk about the WFL, or it was called the William F. Ludwig collection of drum solos. And so I said, "Oh, well, I know those." And so I started playing. I had a few of them memorized. I started playing them for him, and he was, so impressed with that he actually gave me an original copy
Wow.
of the 1941 William F. Ludwig collection of drum solos, and I've been using those to this day. Uh, I've been doing rope drum solos on patriotic holidays in the USA, Memorial Day, and also the 4th of July. And so I make them short, but I'll just execute and play those solos on rope drum as a tribute, not because I'm showing anybody how well I play. That's not what it's about. It's about the tribute
Yeah.
to our fallen soldiers for Memorial Day, or the tribute to the USA and our independence of July 4th.
Right.
And so I still do that today, and it's sort of something that I got from the chief, because it's what he used to do with his father and with Bill Ludwig III on all patriotic holidays.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because the whole Ludwig lineage, that whole story is very interesting. I mean, I've always played Ludwigs. In fact, um, my first set of Ludwigs was a 1965 silver sparkled super classics, which I bought secondhand in my neighborhood. I started playing, and I was playing with guys Friday nights, and then this one guy nearby had these drums, and his room of the house was in the front of the house. So I'd walk by, and when the sun shone on those drums, the silver sparkle, of course, gave out, and I would just stop and
Oh, yeah.
watch and walk by, and we became friends of all the guys who would play. And one day I heard he was selling the drums. I think I was
Oh,
15 or something. And so I quickly ran home, and no, I ran over to his house. I says, "Harvey, you're selling the drums?" "Yeah, I'm going to sell them." And so I says, "Don't move. I'll be right back." So I ran home, and I said to my father, "Dad, I need to buy these drums, and they're this much money." And he looked at me and says, "Well, you have the money?" And I said, "No, but I have this much." So he made a deal with me, that going to school and, that discourse. He said,
yeah.
"Let's make a deal. You pay half, I pay half, but this is the deal." And then I
That's right.
ran over. It was 2 blocks away. I ran over and brought all those parts home. Like I was in heaven. I still have those drums, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, and I recovered them, and the springs that were inside that always made noise.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I opened everything up, and I stuffed them with cotton and things, and I used those drums for a lot of sessions later. A lot. because they
Yeah.
sounded amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, that was a classic sound era for Ludwig drums.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And
Yeah.
the also, I mean, I have the Ludwig's heads that in fact, I have on this drum right here, on my snare drum that I'm sitting beside, the snare drum heads. I mean, I play Evans, but this particular heads there must be something different about these because I only have one, but they sound really different. I don't know if because Ludwig would make their own heads for a while, right?
Oh, yeah, up until really uh, just about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, after I retired, they stopped making heads except for certain sizes. They make like the 14-inch, 13-inch top and bottom drum head for drum sets. They'll still make those,
Okay.
but everything else they work out on their drum sets with Remo now.
Okay.
So yeah, yeah. I still like Ludwig drum heads. In fact, on my snare drums, I always use a Ludwig drum head. There's just something about it. There's a certain sound that I like with that drum head, and so that's what I play today to this day. I try other brands of drum heads on my toms and my bass drums, but there's something about the Ludwig snare drum top head, the coated medium coated top head that I really like.
That's exactly what I have here. And I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out what makes this one different than I mean, anyway, but the drum,
Yeah, I'm not really sure. One of the things that was so hard about working at Ludwig, and I can't believe, first of all, that I lasted 36 years there. I mean, I never dreamed that would be possible to stay at a particular company for 36 years. But one of the things that was the hardest to do was a company that has a legacy that, is at the time, the Ludwig started in 1909. And so when you have a history, you have a responsibility as the director of sales and marketing to kind of keep that history you're still going back to the history. You can't get rid of it, but you have to go to the future. But if you get too far away into the future and you don't pay homage to the legacy, then you're leaving a certain segment of your market behind.
Sure.
So it was always difficult to keep things moving forward, but yet still looking to the past.
yeah, but you did a great job with that. I'm telling you, it's like it maintained no matter whose hands the company was in, you were like the face of the company, really.
Well, in a way, I don't want to take all the credit for it because there were so many people behind the scenes, in the factories, for example. There was staff at the factories that were really excellent. Yes, on the sales and marketing side, and let's just say the corporate side,
yeah.
Things there changed a lot. Yeah. And I happened to be the common thread that sort of survived somehow to keep it all going forward. And even though people say you were in charge of Ludwig, I like to say I was in a position of responsibility for the Ludwig brand. Yeah. And that's something that I got really from Mr. Ludwig, in that he kind of entrusted that to me in, the fairly early years of my career there, in that we connected so much. And it was about the times also that Bill Ludwig III had decided that he wanted to go another direction. He went into the entertainment business. He's in the drum business again now, but he sort of got out of the business for a while. And I sort of became the person that was the non-Ludwig family member, right, that had to carry on the responsibility going forward. Then you have all the new corporate changes that occur with new people from, Wall Street and, financial people becoming involved with new rules, new directions. And I'm not saying it's bad, because they kept us alive. Okay. But it was sort of like they were starting from scratch. They didn't know anything about this, and the history of the brand and the credibility of the people was of no meaning to them.
Right.
So it was a big responsibility to keep all of that together. And again, I still can't believe that I did it for 36 years because there's a joke. I know you know Ron Dennett real well, another fellow Canadian, and but the final 15 years of my career, Ron Dennett would come by the booth and he said, "Jim, I got to get a picture with you. It might be the last show you ever do for Ludwig." And I said, and I was in so much turmoil all the time corporately that it's sort of like, yeah, we better get a picture of me on the Ludwig booth. And so for the last 15 years of my career, we always took the last photo at the NAMM show, we'll say, okay? And it got so funny because I would survive another year where I would say, "Hey, Ron, if you're going to be at the, you got to come over. We got to get the last photo because if we don't, it just might be the last time." And so we did. And so it was so great. In 2019 at the NAMM show, he took the final photo. And I have 15 photos sequentially a year apart of the show. And I was just lucky that I survived it all.
Nice. And the interesting thing about all of this is, I mean, it's great to have the history and to be able to maintain the history and some kind of a sequence. The things are important because, the things are not built, the top, what we see is not built on nothing. It's built on foundations, and the foundations really design what comes next, what comes credibility,
Sure.
history, the meaning to things. Yeah.
I think, the other part that was so, amazing for me was that, again, I said I never stopped playing, but I also never stopped learning new things,
Right.
both in the business world, but also in the percussion world. I was, very much learning what was going on with four-mallet marimba playing and timpani playing and marching percussion to the point where I had a lot of credibility within the market because I could play all those things professionally. Every single thing that the company made, I don't want to say I was an expert at it because there's other guys that were way better than me, but I was proficient in each one of those instruments. And I think that makes a huge difference. So, I could feel things the way the marimba player was explaining it, and the way the timpanist was explaining it, and the marching person and the drum set guy, and, both in jazz and in rock. So it was sort of like being able to absorb the whole market from the player's perspective. And then that's what helped me stay, let's say, effective as a leader in the business side of it.
Sure. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm very much like that myself. I mean, I can sit with somebody and talk about Varese, just like I could talk to somebody about the African drumming or Cuban. And I wrote a book about, Cuban percussion. And it just, your interests are that large. And of course, what it does represent, though, is that you have to keep all those things up. I was lucky with repercussion because that was my ticket, because every day we would switch all the time. The four of us would switch and play all the different things. So every day I had to be up on everything. So it was like, yes, you rehearsed, you learned new repertoire. In one piece, I'm playing marimba, another one I'm playing drum set, another one I'm playing multiple things. It could be anything, whatever we came up with. But the responsibility of always being there and being credible and making it work because you're under pressure all the time. Because
that's right.
Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't work. For me, that was like a pure luck that I have this group that is forcing me into situations. So I had to just keep everything warm and everything.
Yeah.
It was great.
But, this is why my life today, well, it's always been like this because I am what I call a small time local percussionist. Okay. That's what I do. I don't do anything big time. I didn't have time I wasn't good enough and I didn't have the time to travel and things like that because I was traveling for business. So I sort of accepted the fact that I was going to be a well-rounded local percussionist. The thing that I find fascinating is that most of my concerts, I have to sight read.
Nice.
Pretty much sight read. Okay. Now, I mean, I had a big band rehearsal, recently, and coming up in the future, I have a jazz festival. I know I'm only going to have two times on those songs before I perform them.
Right.
Okay, just two rehearsals. That's it. Even coming up fairly soon, I'm going to be playing timpani for a mass at Notre Dame. So a liturgical mass, and the timpani parts, they're not hard, but I will be going over them for the first time, just literally an hour and a half before I perform them. Okay, with a brass ensemble and a choir. And so, that's the way it works. I mean, even the symphony type gigs that I do, many times I'll get two rehearsals and then I have to perform.
Sure.
So that's all the financial resources there are. And so things have to be very, very quick. And of course, combo jazz, that's different. There you make it up on the spot.
Right.
But with the big band, you're reading charts. And so luckily for me, because of all the training that I had in college and with Bobby Christian and with this Cootie Harris, who I studied with as a young person, I learned to sight read good. And so that has been such a valuable commodity for me, to be able to sight read a mallet part, a timpani part, a drum set part, and a snare drum part. And so I love it. I love the fact of being involved in percussion. The fact that I had a 41-year career in the music business, that's a bonus that I never thought was possible. I never planned for that. I was just, I hate to say it, it just sort of was, I just landed in it. And I have a saying that, I was very lucky to go to Notre Dame for grad school, but I wasn't lucky to graduate. I had to work. Okay. And I was very lucky to get my first job in the music industry for Premier Percussion, out of the UK. But I worked in Elkhart, Indiana, which is where I live today. And for 3 years, I was a product manager. And I was lucky to get that job. But that got me to being advertising manager at Slingerland for a couple years, and then eventually to Ludwig. But to survive 41 years in the music industry, that wasn't luck. That was a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights, a lot of travel. And then the final thing is that as a result of me choosing drums in my journey, we talk about, this is a journey, the journey. I saw the whole world.
Yep.
I saw the whole world many times over. And I say that I walked on the great great Chinese Wall, the Great Wall of China. I sailed down the canals of Venice, and I climbed to the top of the Alps in a train, of course, because you can't climb there. And right. That never would have happened if I had not chosen drums and had some level of luck to have the right things happen in my journey, through this life. Yeah. And so I'm very appreciative of how it all worked out. Oh, and the final thing, it's such an important thing, is having the right spouse or wife that supports you in all of these things. And this is a special day. My wife is coming home in about an hour, and this is her final day of work.
Wow.
And because she's retiring. Okay. And so to have the support of your partner in your passions for percussion and business and travel and all the things that I was involved in, you can't do it unless you have that kind of support. And so I feel very blessed.
No, absolutely. And I'll second that, Jim. I was fortunate myself. And I don't believe in coincidences. Of course, you have to show up. You do the work. And opportunities will just be there, and you have to show up, and you have to serve the situation, whatever it is. Pass down information, be helpful to what you're doing, and that's how you lasted all those years, because you were. Yeah, it wasn't a coincidence. You worked at it, and you believed in it, and you had the proper mindset. And then, of course, having somebody in your life that just makes it work, because I can't imagine, and I'm sure you would agree, I cannot imagine going through this craziness in life. We love what we do, and I would not change anything. but it is crazy, but beautiful crazy. But
Yeah.
not being able to share that craziness with somebody who you'll have a laugh at the end of the day, and you say, "Oh, really? Okay, then what?" And laugh about it.
Well, one of the stories I love to tell is, my wife and I will be celebrating our 30th anniversary this summer. And
Right.
so, she would come up to me sometimes, and she'd say, "Oh boy, your band Truth and Jazz, they sounded so good. And boy, they were just so good." And I said, "Well, thanks. I mean, it's a good band." I said, "But come on, I'm going to take you to another band and I'm going to see what you think." And so we went to hear the Rob Parton band. Rob Parton, he's the chairman of the jazz program down at North Texas. Okay, and but he was from Chicago at the time, and we went to that concert. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I see what you mean. Everything is so much tighter. It just the dynamics, and so here she comes from a non-music background, but yet she was able to understand that even though I was in a okay band, I was in a good band, the Rob Parton band was much better. And then I took her to see the Count Basie Orchestra.
Okay.
And then it was sort of like, she said, "Oh my, now I see even more." So I call her. She's a jazz snob now because she's had all of this, and so I gave her a good education, and then that's what helped support me to be able to continue to do what I love to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing better than somebody who gets it, who understands you, and I mean, you have to be, of course, supporting each other in everything. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But
Yeah,
always having somebody's back and somebody having your back, and your interest is in that person is okay. It's like everything else. If everybody's not okay, um, then you're not okay. It's not like if I'm okay, everything's okay. No, no, it's the opposite. Everybody has to be okay, then you're okay. It's the same idea,
that's right.
right? And
And,
that's
and as a jazz musician, I was never the guy that was playing the bars late at night. That wasn't me. I'm doing jazz festivals. I'm doing other stuff that is, from 6 to 8 at night, and or during the day. And so I was very, very lucky that I was able to find those kinds of gigs. I didn't play the smoky places that had alcohol and things like that. I just stayed away from that completely.
yeah. No, and that allows you now. I mean, you're in really good shape. And now after the whole corporate thing that you did, and you're onto this other phase, and you're still playing. So your common thread is the music. Well, I'll say
Yeah.
drumming. It's really the music that brought you through. I
Yeah.
have
And then of course then I got into the teaching element too, because 7 years ago I was asked. Well, I was playing a gig, and one of the band directors, the jazz band director from the University of Notre Dame, and the head band director of the marching band and the concert band, they saw me play, and I was playing along with Mark Colby, who passed away a few years ago, but he was a great jazz sax player. And they said, "Hey, we're looking for someone to come to Notre Dame and teach percussion." And I'm, of course, a Notre Dame grad. And so 7 years ago, I started working at night, because I worked at Ludwig during the day, and then I would go to Notre Dame at night and teach until sometimes 10 o'clock at night. But I did that for a reason, because 5 years ago when I retired, then I started teaching at Notre Dame now during the day.
wow.
So I work, this past semester, 2 to 3 days a week, sometimes a little bit more. And I had 10 students this past semester, which is quite a lot for an adjunct percussion teacher. I think I'm going to take a little bit less this next coming year, because I'll be 71 then, and I think it's time for me to slow it down just a little bit. But
Too
but
much.
I've really enjoyed that part, and I've had to learn new things, because I also teach at St. Mary's College, which is college across the street from Notre Dame, and there I actually have music majors,
Okay.
and so I've had to really up my knowledge of today's modern marimba music, which I have to say is I really, it's at a whole nother level than what I grew up on. Okay. I'm sort of, proficient on vibes and drums and timpani and so many things. But when it went to the new marimba music, boy, that was a challenge. And so I've had to work on that a lot.
Nice. Well, that's good for you. I mean, you'll never get old.
Yeah, I guess so. It's an awful lot of notes, and an awful lot of spread on the keyboard. But it's something that keeps my technique up, and of course, I still practice a lot of snare drum because in teaching drum set, I make sure that my students have a good background in we'll say concert snares techniques, but also rudimental snare techniques. And so I'm practicing all those things all the time. In fact, I can even see back, I have the Fred Albright book and the Cerrone book. And what's so funny is when I decided to get back into teaching, I called my college music professor friends that I have. And I said, look, I've been out of it for a while. What are the books that, people study out of? I said, what I studied out of the Albright and the Cerrone book and things like that. And they say, yeah, Jim, it's the same today. Those are the main books, and Delacluse, for the advanced snare drum students. And so it's just kind of funny, those books are 50 years old, but they're still effective, still good today, just like the Wilcoxon books that of the rudimental drum set stuff or drum stuff that he wrote, they're still effective and still good today.
Sure. Totally. I still have mine sitting right here. Or the Goodman timpani book. I mean, those things, they never leave. Or stick control.
Yeah. I use all those. Syncopation. Reed syncopation. Still use that today. The way Alan Dawson taught it. Johnny Lee Lane, who's a good friend of mine. He gave me some ideas of ways to that the ways Alan Dawson would have sort of structured lessons with those books. And so I still use those myself.
Beautiful. I have a question regarding music education from when you were growing up, when you were a kid. Is it the same, and I'm sure you've seen it as a Ludwig person, because you're seeing the education with band directors and percussionists in the schools. Has anything gone like backwards in the music education, or is it all still on the up and up, and we're still expanding and we're still learning and still interested in culture and music, and especially percussion or music programs in general on an early music level?
Well, here's where I view it. That to me, percussion just keeps evolving, keeps getting more complex. Students today are much better today than I was when I was at their age. That's the way I look at it. Okay. And the only area that I think is challenged is the area of drum set. And here's why I say that, is that percussion is so strong with marching band techniques and all the things they do for percussion ensemble, that when it comes to drum set, it's almost as if there's less people getting interested in the drum set aspects of percussion. Now, that's the total opposite of what we experienced when we were growing up, because there you didn't really know much about all the other percussion stuff. You wanted to play the drum set.
Right.
Because you wanted to be like Ringo or Joe Morello. Okay. And so there was all about the drum set, and you learned all these other things in order to play the drum set. Okay. I feel it's a little bit backwards now, that there's less people that are interested in playing the drum set, even though, we still have incredible drum set technicians and clinicians out there teaching. But the other thing, of course, today is where we had to study from books and from records when I was a kid. That's how you learned. That's what was so important about Ringo, is when we saw Ringo play on the Ed Sullivan Show, all of a sudden we see him doing these, and all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, wow, I think I can do that. I can do that. And so, he made it simple enough that you could sit back and say, I'm going to learn that. I'm physically and visually seeing that. Where, today we have the power of video, and we have so much resource out there that all students can look up on and study and just elevate their overall percussion abilities.
Right. But and I mean things are expanding and there's more of it. I mean now we have access to the world in a minute. I mean I travel the world and I teach online from wherever I'm from. Even when I'm in Cuba, I can teach from there. And I
Yeah,
change my student schedule so wherever I am, and I spend a lot of time in Italy now. Um, they just see they say, Aldo, you have a tan. What happened? Well, I just happened to be in Calabria, you know,
yeah,
something. But now we have a whole different world where you don't physically have to be really anywhere, right? And it could be done
that's right.
instantaneously and almost as effectively, which is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting part of even the business, the corporate world, is that with COVID, so many people learned to work from home, and everybody became remote. And I'm still a tactile kind of a person. A relationship is such an important thing, and building relationships online over a computer, I suppose, is possible, but it's not the same as being there.
Absolutely.
And that was the thing that I loved about at Ludwig. Over the years, I had such a team of colleagues that I became just very close to, like Todd Trent from, who was artist relations, and Chuck Hewick, who worked at Ludwig. And so there were just so many people, but we spent so much time together, traveling, hanging out, carrying on, teasing each other, and things like that. It just made for a very wholesome kind of authentic kind of friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, and those things are important. And at the end of the day, I mean, when one, getting back to our theme, I mean, shaping your journey, you're looking at yourself, for example, in the beginning, you're seeing yourself going down this particular road. And of course, things come up, doors open, or people open doors for you, or you help somebody helps you out and you're just going down this road. And here you are now in your next chapter, and you're still doing it, which is fantastic. So and that's to me, it's like I say to Greg Bizanet, I said, please tell Ringo never to stop. And my friends, anybody, Paul McCartney, or and any of those, I say, as long as those guys are out there playing, I'm still that kid. So
Yeah,
it's just you're the front line and we're just the guys watching and still doing what we do because we love to do it and it justifies no matter how young we are, Jim. So
yeah.
forget just 71. I mean, how's 83 and those guys are still out there,
Oh,
right?
yeah. And Ringo looks great. I mean, I haven't seen Ringo, for I don't know, close to 8 years now or so. But he's very thin, very physically fit. Of course, Mick Jagger is too. These guys, they work out. Okay, they have resources in order to, have trainers and things of that nature and dietitians to have them eat the right food. But yeah, they're very, very physically fit, and that's sort of good to see. So it does give you encouragement
Sure.
of what to do going forward.
Absolutely, and it's important. And it's funny you mentioned Mick Jagger because I was doing a recording in Paris. I was doing a tour, and we were finishing the album in Paris. And I asked the engineer as we're listening to the playbacks, I said, I need to get an espresso. Is there a machine? Right? He says, yeah, just go out and um, just down the hall. There's this espresso machine. So I'm walking there, and I go and I cross this person, and I said to myself, gee, he looks familiar, but I just couldn't place it. So I wanted to hurry back. I get my espresso. I go back, and I said, "How many studios do you have here?" This is one of the main recording studios in Paris. And he says, "Well, we have another smaller studio there, which is really more of a mixing studio. And Mick Jagger's in there right now, actually mixing an album." And he looked. I mean, his face was.
Yeah,
Then I realized it was Mick Jagger, but like physically, he looked like an athlete. So it
yeah,
didn't click right away. It was
yeah,
fun.
yeah. That's great. But yeah, they give us encouragement to go forward because if they can do it, we can do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, I was lucky. I stayed away from a lot of negative things throughout my career. And
Good.
even though I worked in the music industry where, there was, drink was flowing, and there was a lot of things that I could have got involved with that was around me all the time. I never did. And so I always stayed focused and centered on being a family man. And, and this is just me, but I never felt like I was the sharpest knife in the drawer. Okay. So I decided, since I'm not probably the sharpest knife in the drawer, I'm going to have to be the cleanest knife in the drawer so that I can go for a long period of time.
Brilliant. That is brilliant, Jim. That well said too. Absolutely. And I think, I mean, we have to be careful because, if you want to be around for a while and you want to enjoy it, you have to take care of things, your mind, your body, and people around you, and what you do. It's important, and it's about making those decisions and shaping your journey, right?
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, I very much, I mean, some people have said, I should write some sort of a memoir about my journey and stuff. And, I don't know, but there might be 20 people in the world that might want to read it. All right, 21. but anyways,
You should
it's a good journey. And when I call it my true Hollywood story. And the reason why I do that goes back to an old, I think it was a network channel, an old cable channel called E or something like that. But anyways, I can't believe that a kid who saw the Beatles play on a TV show, who decided he wanted to be a drummer, became a drummer, got a degree in drums, became a professional percussionist, then went to work for Ludwig, that made the very drums for Ringo Starr, that started the whole thing. And then now in my, retirement years, I'm teaching college kids, but I'm still playing. It's almost too good to be true that I've been able to continue this journey the way that I have. And yes, I've had a lot of fortune along the way in order to, to keep that going. But sometimes I just sit back and it's like, boy, am I lucky. I think of it that way a lot. And I never did anything big time. Okay. Now, coming up, I have a concert coming up in a little bit where I'm going to be playing with, with Camille Thurman, who plays in the Lincoln Center. She's a jazz saxophone player, and she plays in the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra with Wynton. Okay. I'm going to be your drummer. Now, she doesn't know yet that I'm going to be her drummer for this event that was hired to play. And then I'm also playing for a girl named Mary Camargo, who plays in the Saturday Night Live band, who's a jazz trumpet player. These are young up and coming jazz musicians. And it's a little intimidating because I don't know what they're going to expect from me. And I don't even know what music we're going to play. And so I got to be ready no matter what it is, whether it's, swing, Latin, I know it's going to be fast, whatever it is. So I got to play fast. And but I love that whole idea of going into a musical situation and not really knowing what it's going to be, but knowing that I have enough of a base, of a foundation that I've studied all my life in order to be able to carry it forward to do a decent job. It may not be what they're used to, because they're from New York City. It may not be at the level that they like for New York City, but it will be at a level where the concert that's going to be around here, I'll be able to do a decent job.
Yeah. No, and I know you'll do well. And also, I mean, the expectation is it's like a conversation. It's about being there, and everybody's prepared. And what happens? Everybody's working for the same thing. So it's about being.
Well, Bobby Christian, he always said, remember rule number one, it's not about you. But he also said, remember, it's all about this. It's all about listening. And so you play the room. You listen to your colleagues, and you listen. You play your drum part, knowing that to fit in with the band. I was interviewed last week at the Chicago Drum Show, and what did I say? It was more about, I'm not a real busy kind of a player. Okay, I don't try to do a lot of chops type stuff. I can because I know all the rudimental types of things, but I choose not to because it's not for the kind of drum set playing in jazz will say that I do. Okay, and and I think I get hired because I'm the more basic drummer. I mean, last night I had a big band rehearsal, and we're doing a concert with a jazz clarinet player named Dave Bennett. And Dave Bennett is fantastic. And I'm only going to get one rehearsal with him. And we're doing mostly Benny Goodman music. And of course, recently was Benny Goodman's birthday. And so, in this guy, not only does he play like Benny Goodman, he looks like Benny Goodman, you know. And of course, so this would be a job with a clarinet player. But, you know, he's really good. I've known him for a long time. But, you know, and I like to play authentic to the way the original music was intended. That's what I always strive for. So that takes a little research, you know, listening and, you know, and backing it up so that you can, you know, be the player that if that it was like the original.
Sure. No, that's important. Be authentic, and because that's what you're trying to do is like bring out something that was done in a specific period and by certain people who created something. And the more true you are to that and not affected in an other way that it really is not proper to where it comes from, then you're doing it justice, right?
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. You know, and it's at my, we'll say, my ability level. Okay. So, you know, some of the new fusion types of stuff, you know, with there's just so much happening. You know, I don't even totally understand it, to tell you the truth. And so it's a lot of notes, and I just sort of stay away from that kind of stuff. I do the same thing on vibes.
Right. And I mean you kind of carve your place and where your comfort zone is and you stay in those areas and that's
Oh,
great.
in fact, I just recently kind of made a pact with myself is that this is the type of drummer or the type of vibes player that I am, the type of percussionist that I am. This is what I do. Most of the people around here that I work with, they know it. And I'm not really going to be getting outside that box too far. Okay. Now, I have a saying, and my saying is I'm still a work in progress. I'm just running short on time. Okay. But because, you know, I want to still stay an active musician like Ringo is at 80. I think he's 85 now, actually.
Oh, I
And,
thought
you know,
3, but
83, 85, whatever he is. But anyways, I still feel like I'm a work in progress, and I'm still trying to get better, but I'm trying to get better, not technically. I'm trying to get better musically
makes sense.
to be the much more musical drummer or vibes player. That's always my goal.
And at the end of the day, that's what really matters the most. We're talking about music, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think watching the evolution of Gary Burton on Vibes, I mean, he's to me, he's the best of the best. And I know he's retired, but he's the best of the best. Yeah. And I have every one of his albums. I even have the bootleg albums. Okay. And in the beginning of his career, boy, he was just all over the place. And I mean that in a good way. I mean, he played so many notes. It was so incredible. And I can sort of track on the scale. Things started to simplify as he kept recording later into his years.
Yep.
But every note was the right note. Every note was special and meant something. And yeah. Yeah. So, and even the great jazz players like the Joe Pass, like the jazz guitarist Joe Pass. I mean, that's the way they were too. Herb Ellis, Bucky Pizzarelli, so I like to listen to other musicians and see how they've evolved over time. And they simplified over time too.
Sure. Yeah. Because then you understand that certain things were not necessary. They were an experiment thing, but you really hone it down to what really matters. It's like Miles Davis. In the end, he would play 3 notes. And all you needed.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah, I guess. I still like the earlier Miles stuff myself. The other stuff got a little bit outside for me, but I respect him. I mean, he was really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Jim, we could talk for days, but I would really want to thank you for taking the time to join me. Every time I meet you, we talk about other things, but I'm really happy we're able to sit down and talk about your specific experience and path that you've designed for yourself. Because it's really, at the end of the day, we decide and we do it. Of course, you have to do the work, and then you have to show up, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
So,
Jim. And
well,
as I
thank you.
always-
It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
thank you, Jim. And as I always say, to be continued.